Welcome to the remembrance of the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This has been going on for many, many years. And we have a nice program for you today. This feels like old times. You know, I don't know if y'all realize that OMNI, when we first started OMNI, this is where we met for, what, 10 years? And we were down in what they call the deep end, which is the basement. And there's a lot of history in that part of the building, actually. Apparently that was a gathering for people way back in the protest movement during the Vietnam War. Oh, yeah. And I even heard that Peter, Paul, and Mary played there. Does anybody remember that? Art? Maybe you?
I don't remember Peter, Paul, and Mary.
No? That'd be hard to forget.
But the beginning of the demonstrations started with two young people who spoke downstairs, got us all interested, and we had a demonstration that day or the next day, Wednesday.
Right.
And from then on, every Wednesday, that's when they started in 1967.
I might have even scrambled around here as a little kid. I was probably 8 years old when all that's going on.
1967.
Yeah, I would be 8 years old. Well, you know, speaking of traditions with this event, I do have some somber news, and that is one of our very, very dear friends, and I know that many of you have attended this event faithfully for many years, and so you no doubt remember a man named Bill Williams. He was often our, at least 3 or 4 times he's been our keynote speaker over the years. And he's one of the most powerful, commanding speakers I've ever had the pleasure of hearing in my life. And he passed away on June 26th. He lived in Bella Vista. Just to know, his wife Beverly survives him, and actually 3 sons, 2 sisters, and 5 grandchildren. So, and he was, Bill was served in the U.S. Marines between 1962 and 1968, and then he became extremely active in Veterans for Peace. And he really, really worked hard for peace and justice for us. A big friend of OMNI, so we'll miss him dearly. Just wanted to make note of that before we move on. Many parts of this program are traditional, elements that have evolved over the years, and one is the proclamation from the mayor. And I've said it before, but I think I'll say it again, how lucky I think we are as Fayettevilleans to have Lionel Jordan in our midst, and I'd like to invite
Of all the things that I thought I would say today, and it's wonderful to be here and be able to deliver this proclamation, I think OMNI does great work, and I am very pleased to have them as a partner in this city. So today, if you do catch my Facebook page, I have a quote this morning from Mother Teresa that said, "We have no peace. If we have no peace, it's because we have forgotten that we belong to one another." And that is the thing that we try to do in this city, to make sure that everybody belongs and feels a part and part of a partnership-based government. And because of those beliefs, we have taken positions in this city, such as LGBTQIA rights. We believe in this city that Black lives matter because they do. We fight for living wages where everybody can properly feed, educate, and clothe themselves and their children. We support and fight for common sense gun laws. The killing's got to stop. We believe, as Hillary Clinton said, that women's rights are human rights, and that there should be equal pay for equal work. I believe in all those principles and stand for those, and have taken positions. We believe that science is right. We believe in climate change, and right now we're addressing that with probably one of the best energy action plans. There's only 54 in the United States that passed this energy action plan. We're working on the first stages of that. And I've said all those things because I tell people, they talk about what makes your city unique, and I always tell them, it's not what we market. You can market anything, friends. If you throw enough money at something, you can always market it. But you know, it's not what we market in this city, it's what we believe, and we believe in one another and taking care of one another, this community building community, right? Right. And so with that, I bring the following proclamation. And it says, whereas since 1979, citizens of Fayetteville have gathered, I'm going to receive the proclamation tonight. Gladys, or who is going? I have it. Okay. All right, let me read it here. Whereas since 1979, citizens of Fayetteville have gathered annually to University of Arkansas around the anniversary of the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to remember the loss of life and the destruction caused by wars. And whereas the proliferation of nuclear weapons and missile defense systems throughout the world costs hundreds of billions of dollars, and estimates of nuclear waste disposal costs are upwards to $50 billion or more. And whereas the 20th century has witnessed the development of new skills in conflict resolution, international peacekeeping, and a burgeoning human rights system, encouraging the hope that our culture can become one of promoting peace and constructive cooperation. Whereas the United Nations General Assembly seeks individual commitment via the Manifesto 2000 to make this decade a time to transform the culture of war and violence into a culture of peace and nonviolence. And whereas the Manifesto 2000 further states that each individual may share in his or her responsibility for the future of humanity, in particular to the children of today and tomorrow. And whereas this year marks the 73rd anniversary of the first bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. Now therefore I, Lionel Jordan, Mayor of the great city of Fayetteville, Arkansas, do hereby proclaim August 12, 2018 as remembrance of the bombing of Hiroshima Nagasaki in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I encourage each of us to honor our peacemakers and renew our commitment to the prevention of such suffering in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I just have to pinch myself. I mean, how many mayors are going to stand up there and do that? You're so good. Thank you, Michael. A little housekeeping things. I just realized I got here and I didn't even say it. My name's Kelly Mulholland, and I'm the Vice President of OMNI on the board. And another thing I didn't mention is that we always come up with a theme. This year, our theme, we call it Back from the Brink. And I think that's pretty obvious what we're thinking here. But a few years ago, who would have known that we would now be sitting with a president that's playing games with nuclear weapons? And suddenly, this is not just an abstract thing to worry about. This is really something we should be worried about, concerned about, and mindful of. As usual, Donna has something strange up her sleeve. My wonderful wife, Donna, and as usual, she's barefoot.
I was born this way.
Born this way. And I'm going to let her tell you what happened. And I'm going to help her out a little bit.
So, this year we hadn't really planned anything really specific to do, and Kelly was having a meeting about this with Gladys about a week ago, about putting this together, and I had to pick him up. And I went into the OMNI library, which if you've never been to the OMNI library, check it out. There are some amazing books to read. And I happen to love children's stories. And I was just riffling through all the children's books, and I pulled this one out called Feathers and Fools by Mem Fox. And it just ripped my heart out because it fit the theme today so perfectly. So I'm going to tell you the story.
And by the way, this lovely depiction of the cover Donna made for the occasion.
Feathers and Fools.
And by the way, I'm going to be playing an instrument from Japan called the ukulele, which my mother brought back from Japan 30 years ago for me. And I think it would be appropriate to accompany the story.
In a rambling garden long ago in one of them said, "How strange that swans swim. Fortunately, we don't swim or we would drown." The peacock said, "I fear the swans. They're strong. They'll drive us from our gardens and force us to swim." They rustled their feathers anxiously and began to make plans. Peacocks gathered great quantities of feathers, and they sharpened them into arrows, and they hid them in their gardens. "We can protect ourselves against the swans," said a foolish peacock, just loud enough for the swans to hear. "We'll hurl our arrows and destroy anyone who tries to change our way of life," said the king of the peacocks. The swans heard those fighting words, and they sharpened feathers of their own and hid them in the rushes. Now, for safety's sake, both sides added stockpiles, but they were dismayed to find out that the more arrows they acquired, the more terrified they became. None of the birds slept. Every sound made their hearts race. Every movement made them tremble. One day, a swan flew high over the peacocks, carrying reeds for nest building. But the peacocks panicked. They thought that the reeds were arrows. Another day, a peacock passed by the lake with some material for a nest, and the swans thought that those grasses were arrows. Both sides began to attack. A cloud of arrow feathers rose up into the sky and blocked out the sun. Not one bird remained alive. Silence hung over the lake. And then, in the shadows of the garden, an egg hatched, and a small peacock staggered out into the stillness. And then, among the rushes and the reeds by the lake, a second egg hatched, and out a small swan teetered out of the ruins. They stumbled towards each other, full of curiosity and trust. "You look just like me," said the peacock. "You have feathers and 2 legs." "You're just like me," said the swan. "You have a head and 2 eyes." "Shall we be friends?" said the peacock. "Most certainly," said the swan. So off they went together, unafraid of each other, and they lived in peace, and they shared the world.
Thank you, Don. That was wonderful. It really was fortunate that you found that book at that time. I don't know how that happened.
Just jump off shelves when there's those.
Speaking of books, our founder, Mr. Dick Bennett, who I think everybody in this room admires and loves, actually has brought it to our attention that there's a very important book has just come out that is worth mentioning. And it's by Daniel Ellsberg, and it's called The Doomsday Machine. And here to give a synopsis of what this book is about and how important it is, one of our, actually our keynote speaker last year, and one of my favorite activists and peacemakers in this town, Abel Tomlinson.
So this is the book, The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner, and it's as good as they say. And to emphasize how good this book is, actually some of my biggest national peace heroes are plowshares activists, in the vein of Daniel Berrigan, Father Berrigan, and some of these people that, really tried to fulfill some of the biblical messages like turning swords to plowshares and studying war no more, Isaiah 2:4. And that's a really inspirational thing for me. But this book is really powerful, and I wrote a really long review of it, and it's on my website, abeltomlinson.com, but I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to condense it down, and I better get to it. So, The Doomsday Machine by legendary whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg tells how he became a high-level nuclear war planner with access to some of the biggest top secrets in the United States. In addition to the Pentagon Papers, he copied top-secret nuclear war plans, too, and he planned to leak them later. Unfortunately, the documents were lost, and to hear that story, you'll have to read the book. Now, Ellsberg finally reveals the story, after much of the information has been declassified. Ellsberg opens the book by exposing secret plans for a first-strike thermonuclear attack on every major city in the Soviet Union and China, killing 600 million people. This was the plan by our government, our military leaders. This estimate included not just bombing cities full of civilians, but also killing hundreds of millions in neighboring European nations from fallout. This was on their analysis. They would kill hundreds of millions of Europeans as well, including allies and neutral nations. He writes, Ellsberg writes, "This piece of paper should never have existed. It depicted evil beyond any human project ever." Ellsberg also tells his experiences investigating weaknesses in the U.S. command and control of nuclear forces. Many believe the president alone has authority to launch nuclear war, but no. This authority has been delegated to many low-level commanders in the military, greatly increasing our peril. Nuclear war can be started by false alarms, unauthorized attacks, and accidents. Additionally, Russia offers parallel danger with their dead hand system, or perimeter is another name for it. It automatically triggers full-scale nuclear war, which could occur after a single nuclear terrorist attack in Moscow. Think about that. It's an automatic system, so if a bomb goes off in Moscow, the system automatically launches thousands of nuclear warheads at the United States. And the United States has a similar dangerous system. Both doomsday machines threaten all humankind. A key idea not understood by early nuclear war planners until 1983 is nuclear winter. It's an important concept a lot of the American public doesn't fully understand is nuclear winter. Those plans for killing half a billion people were underestimated. They would have actually killed 3 billion people, and now 7 billion people. The US or Soviet thermonuclear attack would cause ferocious firestorms in the bombed cities, sending massive amounts of smoke into the upper atmosphere, blocking out sunlight and lowering temperatures worldwide for a decade or more. Within a year or two, this would destroy nearly all plant life, and humans and animals that require the plants for food. And if you haven't watched it, there's a documentary or a movie, hopefully it will never be a documentary, called The Road. It's the most horrific story you could imagine. It actually gives somewhat of a realistic vision of, the nightmare vision of what nuclear winter would be like in a world devoid of sunshine, green leaves, flowers, animals, food. Ellsberg also details that this omnicidal threat has continued without interruption under every president since Truman, with each actually using these weapons as tools for coercion. And if you hear modern presidents, not just Trump, he's the most egregious example of fire and fury, but other presidents, modern presidents, say all options are on the table. And that means we might potentially drop nuclear bombs on you. Thousands of bombs remain on hair trigger alert, and the primary U.S. plan has always been first strike decapitation to obliterate Russia's ability to respond, and that would trigger nuclear winter. Too many rationalize this danger, but as Ellsberg writes, no policies in human history have more deserved to be recognized as criminal, immoral, insane, and evil. He also chronicles the development of strategic bombing. Strategic bombing is the code word of cities. This demented thinking concludes that virtually all civilians are also involved in a war, and therefore legitimate targets. This started during World War II, that some of our military leaders in all the countries, England, America, Germany, thought that, everyone is involved in the war because somebody's growing food or they're making, machinery, that somehow it's indirectly tied to the war machine, so everyone is a legitimate target to be bombed. This is the dark logic of terrorism, and Ellsberg concludes that presidential threats of nuclear attacks are terroristic threats. The good news is this, that dismantling the doomsday machine is relatively simple physically and could be accomplished in 1 year. However, the difficulty is political and institutional resistance because it would require abandoning the illusion that it's possible to limit damage to the United States with preemptive first strike. In light of nuclear winter, Damage limiting is revealed as a suicidal hoax, or as he says, a SAD, someone called it SAD, a self-assured destruction. Total abolition of nuclear weapons must be the long-term goal, but Ellsberg makes a distinction that there can be a two-step process, and the first step is, at the very least, removing the capability to threaten our near extinction. This means, and he's specific about this means dismantling all the land-based missile forces, strategic nuclear bombers, all the strategic nuclear bombers, and here's where it's different, most Trident submarines, and most of the warheads on the remaining Trident submarines. So he's saying that we don't necessarily at first have to eliminate all nuclear weapons, but we need to eliminate the threat of nuclear winter. And you could still even keep a few nuclear weapons at first, but not enough to cause the near extinction of everyone. Politically, we need a powerful motivational force for a broad and urgent movement. Past experience shows Congress won't hold real investigative hearings without major change in public awareness, which is the purpose of this book, to raise public awareness, and also massive pressure from citizens, which will require courageous whistleblowers. He really thinks that we really need someone in line with the Pentagon Papers to leak information about our secret nuclear war planning. And he concludes with Dr. King, "Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world." Thank you.
Thank you, Abel, very much. So I would like to invite our director and dear friend Gladys Tiffany up for just a few words.
And thank you, folks, for being here. I just would like to express our gratitude for the number of people who come out and share our strong feeling about the desperate need for peace in this world. And I would like to remind you that it really is an important part of doing this work that we raise some money to do it. And many of you are probably aware that the main fundraiser we do is the lasagna dinner we do earlier in the year, and it got iced out. So we could use your memberships and your donations this year. So Kathy and Art, Kathy, could you step out where people can see you and Art? They're taking care of, Kathy is our treasurer, and Art is our the president of our OMNI FHS chapter, and they're both on our board. But if you could make sure and fill out the membership form and give us a donation tonight, we would so much appreciate it. Because all the beautiful things that we received tonight from the mayor's proclamation, we want to make these things come true. We want these to be real in our country and in our lives. And we damn well want our community to be like this. So please help us, and thank you for your presence tonight.
Well, I'm really looking forward to our next contributor. You know, I think most of us here know Joe Neal, and Joe Neal is best known as, the Birdman of Arkansas. He co-wrote the Arkansas Bird Book along with James, and he does much for the community. But one thing you probably didn't know about Joe is he has kind of a sordid past, and he used to be. In fact, I've only heard these rumors. Apparently, he was quite a troublemaker in his early days. And some of that trouble was made right in this very building, I understand. And I'm sure all for good reasons, in fact. And you should be proud of that, Joe. That's good. That's part of your legacy. And it's nice to have you back. It's been a while. So what we have, Joe's actually going to read a poem for us. Let me introduce Joe Neal.
I have to apologize to Burr, who asked me to come and read a poem. I made what's called a pen and ink change in my presentation. I want to read you something else. Behind the war prayer is the arrogance of power, the presumption of the very strong who confuse power with wisdom and set out upon self-appointed missions to police the world, to defeat all tyrannies, to make their fellow men rich and happy and free. Great nations in the past have set out upon such missions, and they have wrought havoc, bringing misery to their unintended beneficiaries and destruction upon themselves. America is showing some signs of that fatal presumption, that overextension of power and mission, which has brought ruin to great nations in the past. The process has hardly begun, but the war which we are now fighting can only accelerate it. If the war goes on and expands, if that fatal process continues to accelerate until America becomes what she is now and never has been, a seeker after unlimited power and empire, the leader of a global counter-revolution, then Vietnam will have had a mighty and tragic fallout indeed. So that's more than 50 years ago, and it was written by a resident of Fayetteville, former president of the University of Arkansas, somebody who walked the same streets we walk now. He was then a United States Senator named J. William Fulbright.
Yeah.
And that's from his book, Arrogance of Power. And just before I came here, I decided to do this because that book was published in 1966 when I was an undergraduate student here. And it just had an absolutely profound effect on me to read it. And I was preparing to go for a career in the United States Army at that time. I was in advanced ROTC program. And I was just absolutely overwhelmed by what I realized and seeing it. And I wanted to share that with you. Seems more important than reading a poem, which I can read some other time. Thanks a lot.
You know, a great, strong ally of OMNI for years has been the St. Scholastica Monastery at Fort Smith. And we have Sister Rosalie Rooswald here today, and I'm so pleased to have you again. I think today we're going to have you speak about, speak about war and why it never works. And I just love that subject matter. Let's welcome Sister Rosalie Rooswald.
Well, this will be mainly my reflections on war and on peace activities. And I'm from St. Scholastica Monastery, as we said, and that gives you a clue to the faith tradition that I come out of. I entered St. Scholastica in the early 50s, and after teaching a few years in grade school and high school, I found myself in campus ministry in the 80s in Texas. When I was asked to speak on my thoughts on war and my interest in peace activity, I recall stories of my grandmother. As a young woman, she left Germany in the late 1800s, hoping to marry and raise a family in peace in the United States. She did not want her sons to be casualties of war. She didn't want them to be, as she said, fodder for the cannons. However, as it turned out, her first son was in World War I fighting the Germans. Another son was in World War II fighting the Germans. My real awakening to the importance of peace work came in the early 80s in Texas, where I met Hetty, a Mennonite from Canada, who had been sent by a peace group in Seattle, Washington. And the peace group was from Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. Her assignment was to watch for the movement of the White Train. Have any of you heard of the White Train? Mm-hmm. The White Train, she was to report when it left the Pantex plant. Pantex is a 16,000-acre site 17 miles northeast of Amarillo. During World War II, it was an Army site, and later it became the primary facility for the assembly, the disassembly, and the maintenance of nuclear weapons. The White Train regularly left Pantex during the night, always in darkness, carrying nuclear warheads bound for either the west or the east coast. One destination of the white train was a U.S. naval base close to Seattle, where there was a Trident nuclear submarine. It was here at Pantex that I first participated in peace activities, holding up signs or banners with Hetty as workers left the plant. And sometimes I went with her at the night to watch for when the train left. She would report to someone in Seattle that the train was coming. He would notify peace activists along the way, and they would stand by the track with their candles or have a prayer service or sometimes get on the track. Each summer, a big peace vigil was held outside the Pantex fence. Even peace activists from other countries attended. Some camped overnight outside the fence. Peace cranes were folded and hung all over the fence. There were speeches, prayer services, and singing. Buddhist monks in their colorful robes also attended. It was also from this Mennonite that I first heard of the peace churches. Their members did some other kind of alternative service but did not serve in the military because they took Jesus' word seriously about loving one another and loving the enemy instead of killing them. This struck me, and I wondered why the Catholic Church and other Christian churches weren't all peace churches. And that is still a bit of a mystery to me, especially since the first 300 years of Christianity, the church was pacifist. No Christians could be in the military because being in the military meant one was willing to kill. It was with Constantine, the first Roman emperor to become a Christian, that things changed. Christianity became a legalized religion. And now Christians were expected to be in the military. It was also the beginning of the just war theory. The peace churches never accepted the just war theory, and they suffered for their countercultural stance. After 3 years in campus ministry in Texas, I returned to Fort Smith and was assigned to the Social Justice Committee. We focused on different timely, critical issues and wrote letters to legislators. For example, in the 90s, we studied the death penalty, and as a community agreed to sign the moratorium now in 1999. Pope John Paul II was visiting in St. Louis at that time, and he said that the death penalty could be used in only very rare occasions. What is interesting is just a few weeks ago, Pope Francis says the death penalty is never acceptable.
Yeah.
He said in all cases, unacceptable. There has been a slow evolution on church teaching on the death penalty, just as there has been on the condemnation of slavery and on the rights of women. The church moves very slowly, as everybody knows. My hope and prayer is that this Pope Francis will forcefully state that war too is never justified, that it is based on lies, and that it is a racket and totally unacceptable. Hearing the drumbeats of war in 2002, we began holding weekly peace vigils from 2002 until 2014 in Fort Smith's Creekmore Park every Sunday. Some memories that stand out from those vigils are the grandmother in her 90s who sat in her lawn chair holding a big sign saying "Grandmothers Against War." And then there was the blind man who played taps after every meeting on his bagpipes. After the reading of the names of the casualties of that week, he would play taps. Then there was the hours-long reading of the names of the dead troops when the number reached 4,000, and that took us late into the night to get all those names read. And then on a Sunday in May of 2010, we had a surprise of finding a group of bike riders in the park. The George brothers, with some veteran friends, were beginning their ride to the end, trek across the country, inviting veterans along the way to join them in telling their stories, singing their songs, and sharing the burdens that veterans suffered. how devastating it was to hear just a few years later that Jacob, so talented and creative, and who had helped so many other veterans deal with their pain, had himself become a casualty of war. That was a heartbreaker. In the late 1800s, Julia Ward Howe wrote a Mother's Day proclamation calling for all women in the world to unite against war and to refuse to allow their sons to kill the sons of other mothers. It seems she recognized we are one human family, no matter what color or religion. Doesn't it seem that it's time for another proclamation against war, that appealing not just to women, but to all of us? And there is good news. In 2016, 80 prominent peace workers from 25 different nations were invited to the Vatican for a conference to discuss formally abandoning the just war theory. After 3 days of deliberation, a statement was presented to Pope Francis, asking that he write an encyclical, as he did on the environment. You know, our common home, a few years ago, he wrote a beautiful encyclical that was powerful. But to write an encyclical declaring that war is totally incompatible with Christ's teachings. So, that's a sign of good news. Father George Zabelko is one of the veterans who realized he had been brainwashed into believing that the bombing in Japan was necessary. So it never entered his mind to protest. George Zabelko was the Catholic chaplain of the airmen who dropped the atomic bombs. He blessed their mission before they went. Imagine, the bomb, a little boy, and what they call Fat Man, the whole mission blessed by the Catholic chaplain. Years later, realizing what a contradiction this was to the gospel, he made a complete turnaround, became a pacifist, and spent the rest of his life trying to make up in some way for his participation in the horror of the destruction. He saw that he had denied the foundation of his faith, giving support, moral and religious support to this. He made a pilgrimage to Japan to express his shame, guilt, sorrow, grief, whatever. We can't imagine the agony he suffered. Zabelka came to the same conclusion that many other veterans came to, that they were brainwashed to believe orders given them were for a noble cause. Major General Smedley Butler of the U.S. Marine Corps, for many years, described war as a racket or big business. Butler realized he had been used. George Zabelka came to the same conclusion, and so did dear Jacob George.
We continue to have our OMNI Open Mic for Peace it's getting ready to gear up again in September on the first Sunday of every month. And it's been going for 17 years, we've lost count actually. And you're all invited. And so many great songs have been born in this Open Mic for Peace. It's designed basically to encourage people to write and share songs of peace, justice, and ecology. And to encourage that kind of repertoire among the other songs. It's all good, but we need more of that. And one person who's really been good at rising to that occasion, and one of the musicians who's really shaking things up around here, and really putting some good stuff out, is Walter Schmidt. Actually, he called me and he emailed us and wanted to share a brand new song that he just written. And we were both very enamored right away and thought it would be a good part of this program. But not only that, he actually chose to customize it for this occasion. Is that right? So without further ado, Walter Schmidt.
I don't write a lot of topical material. Usually, you're either singing to the choir or it goes out of date really fast. The last time I wrote a topical song, well, I've written two since the new administration, but before that, I wrote about Martha Stewart going to jail. Remember that? How long ago that was? That was the last time I wrote that. This song came about this way. I teach guitar, and one of the tunes that I teach to people who want to learn bluegrass is an old American fiddle tune called Liberty. And in light of current events, I was moved to put lyrics to that tune. I wrote a verse and a chorus, and I wrote another verse, and I was struck by an idea. I would crowdsource the writing of this song. And the reason you guys got the copy is because I sent a couple of verses to Donna and said, this is how the song is going to go. Would you like to contribute a verse or two? And I did that for about 6 or 7 people, songwriters. And I got a few very oblique suggestions. I got one really strong suggestion about a verse which I rewrote what she contributed, but so I have to say Emily Cates is a co-writer on this song because she contributed the idea and a couple of lines for the global warming verse, which you will hear. For those of you who are somewhat aware or somewhat exposed to political folk music, I will just tell you I came in costume tonight. This is my Roy Zimmerman costume. So the song is called Liberty. I've been watching all the news, and I don't like what I'm seeing, and I don't know about you, but I think some folks are being more than just a bit abused, and we need to pay attention, or we may find we've lost our liberty. They used to say the president has got a bully pulpit, but in the past that meant something more than just the bullshit and the lies to circumvent the truth of never-ending scandal and the truth of his disdain for liberty. In the name of law and order, suppress the votes and roll back rights. Unarmed blacks are shot dead in the streets. Children crying at the border, but none of them are white, so who really cares about their liberties? If you're watching Fox TV, you are watching propaganda, and the gross mendacity leaves me nauseated and a little fearful. You can see we need to take some action. We need to act to save our liberty. Drain the swamp was quite a promise, like the promise of a wall. And I'm not Nostradamus, but here's a judgment call. Although the signs are ominous, the nation will survive, but not without some loss of liberty. In the name of law and order, suppress the votes and roll back rights. Unarmed blacks are shot dead in the streets. Children crying at the border, but none of them are white. Who really cares about their liberties? It's very simple. Global warming is a scientific fact, and the facts are so alarming. How can anyone not act? It's not like we've had no warning. They continue to deny it, and when things break down, folks will lose their liberty. Do you remember Puerto Rico, or the marching neo-Nazis and the slurs about Latinos? How can anybody not see that it fits with all that we know about white supremacy and how it's threatening the nation's liberty? We remember Hiroshima, we remember Nagasaki, while sitting in the White House is a narcissist who seems a little cruel and way too cocky, ignoring history, making threats of war, invoking liberty. In the name of law and order, suppress the votes and roll back rights. Unarmed blacks are shot dead in the streets. Children crying at the border, but none of them are white. Who really cares about their liberties? Children crying at the border, none of them are white. So who really cares about their liberties? I've been watching all the news, and I don't like what I'm seeing, and I don't know about you, but I think some folks are being more than just a bit abused, and we need to pay attention, or we may find we've lost the nation's liberty.
This is another traditional element of this remembrance, and it's the more solemn thing. But I think it's really important to put some names together with this concept of remembering the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It can make it just seems more realistic, and we're going to combine that with a Japanese ceremony called the Obon ceremony. Karen, would you be willing to talk about this? Karen Takamoto can maybe explain a little bit more about this ceremony and how it relates to what we're getting ready to do. We're going to read names.
Each summer in Buddhist temples all around the world, this is a season for remembering our ancestors, and it's called Obon. And that as part of the tradition, many times people will write messages and will be on ribbons and around the temple. And if you happen to be at a temple that is near a waterway, an ocean, many times an ocean, they will light lanterns and set it into the water and let them drift away. And so I think one of the things that we need to remember that while we will read just 12 names tonight, at Hiroshima, I believe there was over 80 to 90,000 people that died that day, and thousands more, tens of thousands more in the ensuing weeks and months and years following that. Nagasaki lost another 40,000 at least, and again, tens of thousands more in the weeks and months and years following that. So with each name read, think of that as 10,000 people, or 15 or 20. We don't really know the numbers.
Now, are you able, or are you going to give her the other ring? And then I think Donna's going to ring a bell for each person's name, just to make it okay. So. And since we don't have a water, we'll have to use the top of the piano. But it'll be symbolically appropriate.
Yes. Hachiko Sakai. Goro Kiyoyoshi. Fumie Enseki. Iwao Fukui. Koi Nakamichi. Yoshiaki Tamuro.
Mikio Inoue. Satoru Yoshimoto. Kiyoaki Ueno. Yoshihime Hara. Setsuko Yamamoto. Sumaka Yamada.
Thank you, that was very nice. It's important to keep our names fresh in our minds. It's also to keep it important to have, keep our minds refreshed with new information and invigorated with new ideas. And we have a keynote speaker that I think is going to accomplish that very thing. I happened to have gotten a preview of Dr. Kuzmarov's work at the peace rally that Abel organized in spring, and was very impressed. And I'm so pleased that we have the opportunity to have him back. Now, Dr. Kuzmarov is an assistant professor of history at the University of Tulsa. He possesses expertise in a wide range of topics, including foreign policy, security, intelligence, and criminal justice. He's widely published with many, many articles and several books. Among the books, The Russians Are Coming, The Myth of the Addicted Army, Modernizing Repression, and we're really just fortunate to have him here from Tulsa. And so I'd like to help me welcome Dr. Jeremy Kuzmarov.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and I want to thank Dick Bennett especially for introducing me to this wonderful group of people here at OMNI. And yeah, it's nice to speak here again because I spoke here in March of last year. Yasuaki, I think it was very nice to give voice, the name that these were real human beings who were afflicted with the horrors of the atomic bomb. In Tulsa, we had a wonderful organization called Hibakusha Stories came. They've come 3 times now, and they'll be coming this September as well. That brings atomic survivors to come and give testimonials. And it's very powerful. Of course, now they're aging, so there's a small window of opportunity. And these are really the voices that we need to hear. One of those who spoke was Yasuaki Yamashita. He was a 6-year-old schoolboy living in Nagasaki, whose world was shattered on August 9, 1945, when the second atomic bomb was dropped by an American B-29 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima. Yasuaki was playing in the mountains catching insects when a friend told him to be careful because of the overhead planes. After running home, he escaped to the family shelter and heard a huge crashing noise that appeared to be like thousands of lightning bolts striking at the same time. Feeling his mother's body covering his body, Yasuaki heard another huge explosion and then total silence, noticing that the windows and doors had all been shattered and the roof had disappeared. His sister's head was covered in glass and she was bleeding, and she said she felt she was covered in oil, a sign of possible chemical weapons. Though she had a prosthetic leg, she was able to run with Yasuaki to take refuge in the mountains, where they watched the city of Nagasaki burn. This moving story was told to us last year, again as part of this group, and you can look them up. It's Hibakusha Stories. They have a website with more details about the organization. It's actually has some been supported by Clifton Truman, Harry Truman's grandson, who may have felt some guilt about what his grandfather did and wants these stories heard. And actually, part of the goal of the organization is not only to remind people of the terrible history, but with the goal of building a nuclear-free world. On the day that the bomb was dropped, Yasuaki remembered a tremendous, indescribable scene of desolation in which everything in the city burned up, and which was followed by a terrible time when there was acute food shortages. One of his young friends was so badly burned on his back that his wounds became infected with maggots, causing him to die 2 days later. Yasuaki's father was killed as he had been working in a naval shipyard, and I think he was part of the police force, and they sent him near the epicenter to help the victims, and he died quickly thereafter, like so many others. Though Yasuaki and his sister did survive, he faced health problems and discrimination that prompted him to move to Mexico, where he's worked for the last 40 years as an artist. Mexico actually does have very light nuclear policy, so the government has supported many of his talks, whereas unfortunately our government doesn't. In his talk in Tulsa, he stressed that people at the time did not know much about radioactivity and its effects, and that many who were in the bomb's vicinity died later from leukemia and other cancers, while others committed suicide because they could not bear the survivor's guilt, as well as the discrimination. Yasuaki's talk was followed by the testimony of Shigeko Sasamori, who spent the morning of August 6th. She was a victim of the Hiroshima attacks on August 6th. She was 13 years old at the time. She was creating fire breaks in the city of Hiroshima with her junior high school class. When the Enola Gay US B-29 bomber appeared overhead, Shigeko told her classmates to look up at the plane in the sky. They were kids and thought this was funny or something nice. But at that moment, she saw a white parachute dropping from the plane. Then all of a sudden, she was blown back by the force of the explosion and lost her consciousness. When she woke, everything was pitch black, though Shigeko was able to make out some people walking slowly with their skin hanging from their bones, bleeding profusely, something out of what we can only imagine out of a horror movie, but it's real life. Trying to get back to her school, Shigeko sat down near a big tree and again lost consciousness. When her face burned beyond recognition and was swollen like a football, she spent the next 5 days in a big auditorium where an unknown person brought her to be rescued. They would bring the victims, some were clinging to life, to a large auditorium. Many died in that auditorium. It was just chaos. Luckily in her case, her parents combed the city looking for her desperately. But that's why they were brought to the auditorium, so parents could try and find their kids. And in her case, a miracle, her parents did find her, and she was very badly burned, but she did survive the attacks. And part of it was her persistence. She said that she repeated her address over and over and over again. I think somebody was able to get in touch with her parents. Along with many of her classmates, Shigeko's grandmother died, and an older sister got cancer and died. In 1955, because she was very badly burned, she was, a number of years later, brought to New York City as part of a group of young women known as the Hiroshima Maidens, who were sponsored by the author and activist Norman Cousins. And she underwent numerous plastic surgeries. But it was a miracle that, if you see her, she does still bear some of the scars, and she has had several cancer operations in her life. But, by the grace of God, she's 86 years old now, and she has lived a long life. And luckily, because a terrible thing was that many of the kids, not only were, countless people burned and subjected to radiation poisoning, many of their offspring were affected as well. Shigeko's son was born healthy, and when he was born, she said, "You will never go to war to kill other people and to kill yourself." And she herself, I think to her great credit, has worked tirelessly throughout her life, ever since, for nuclear disarmament and for peace. And there's others in the audience to do the same. And I think, all of us are already committed to that goal, so I think that's great. We have to hear the message and, the horrors of war. I think the government and often media does so much to shield us from the true costs of war, but it's up to us, to look into it, and we have these voices that cry out as to what war does, and it's really a call for us to work as hard as we can to end wars, as was discussed earlier. The dropping the atomic bomb, I think it's great that this commemoration is going on. It was an unjust act of war that could have been avoided, as many historians have documented, because the Japanese were ready to surrender months earlier. The main pressing issue was their desire to retain the emperor as a symbol of Japanese sovereignty, which the United States ultimately agreed to. The Pacific War itself was caused in part by the U.S. drive for dominance in the Asia-Pacific region and a naval buildup by the FDR administration, an embargo which provoked Japanese hardliners who had attempted to create a Pan-Asian Union capable of resisting Western imperialism, which had decimated China and much of the continent. The Japanese were never even given a chance to respond to the first attack on Hiroshima before the second bomb on Nagasaki was launched, which was a pure show of force. Time magazine military, I think a lot of people forget that very high-level military generals at the time had actually said that the bomb was unjustified. People like Dwight Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, and General Leahy. Another was Time magazine, which generally very supportive of U.S. foreign policy, but their military analyst at the end of World War II was Hanson Baldwin, and he concluded, quote, "The enemy in a military sense was in a hopeless strategic position by the time the Potsdam demand for surrender was made on July 26th. Such then was the situation when we wiped out Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Need we have done it? No one of course can be positive, but the answer is certainly in the negative." And this is from Time magazine. So why? Popular accounts still stick to the false but greatest generation story that without them more Japanese would have died in U.S. assault on the islands, as would have tens of thousands of Americans, as Mike Hashimoto wrote in the Dallas Morning News in 2016. There's still this mythology that the bomb saved lives and was necessary to end the war, even though Time magazine and top-level military generals at that time said it was unnecessary and gratuitous. Historian Martin Sherwin has debunked the tale of the good atomic bomb, citing in his 2003 book, A World Destroyed, a considerable body of new evidence that suggested the bomb may have cost, rather than saved, not only the hundreds of thousands of Japanese, but also American lives. If the U.S. had not been so determined to complete, test, and finally use the bomb, it might have arranged the Japanese surrender weeks earlier, preventing much bloodshed on Okinawa. So it may have actually caused more American deaths, as well as more Japanese deaths. Of course, many, many more Japanese deaths. Another historian, Samuel Walker, details how Henry Stimson, who's the Secretary of State, inflated the casualty projections for the Japanese Kyushu Islands in a ghost-written Harper's Magazine article, with subsequent U.S. leaders inflating the numbers further. He wrote an article making it seem like the casualty projections were much higher than the actual documents. George H.W. Bush claimed the bomb saved 1 million U.S. lives, so it was later inflated even further that Bush publicly said this, that the bomb saved 1 million U.S. lives, when the original casualty projection for an invasion of Kyushu was less than 30,000. I don't know if anybody in the audience has heard of Wilfred Burchett. Anybody? It's worth looking him up. He's a very interesting guy. He was an Australian news correspondent. He became quite well known in the Vietnam era because he reported the war from the Vietnamese side. And he was an Australian, and actually he first gained repute as a journalist when he broke through the U.S. military censors to expose the horrific effects of the atomic bomb less than 30 days after the bomb had been dropped. His classic article was called The Atomic Plague. If you're interested, I can email it to Dick and he can send it to everybody. It's a sobering read. It's not a pleasant read, but it's a very sober read, which thoroughly discredits the view that the bomb somehow served any humanitarian end. Mr. Burchett wrote, and there was huge censorship, so the American public really did not know of the effects until a long time thereafter. But Mr. Burchett wrote in his article, in Hiroshima, 30 days after the first atomic bomb destroyed the city of Hiroshima and shook the world, people are still dying mysteriously and horribly. People who are uninjured by the cataclysm from an unknown something which I can only describe as atomic plague. Hiroshima, he said, does not look like a bombed city. It looks as if a monster steamroller had passed over it and squashed it out of existence. I write these facts as passionately as I can in the hope that they'll act as a warning to the world. The first testing ground, the atomic bomb, I've seen the most terrible and frightening desolation in 4 years of war. It makes a Blitz-Pacific island seem like an Eden. The damage is far greater than photographs can show. When you arrive in Hiroshima, you can look around, and for 25, perhaps 30 square miles, you can hardly see a building. It gives you an empty feeling in the stomach to see such man-made devastation. I picked my way to a shack used as temporary police headquarters in the middle of the vanished city. Looking south from there, I could see about 3 miles of reddish rubble. That is all the atomic bomb left of dozens of blocks of city streets, of buildings, homes, factories, and human beings. There is just nothing standing except about 20 factory chimneys with no factories. I looked west, a group of half a dozen gutted buildings, and then again nothing. The police chief of Hiroshima welcomed me eagerly as the first Allied correspondent to reach the city. With the local manager of Domei, a leading Japanese news agency, he drove me through, or perhaps I should say over the city, and he took me to hospitals where the victims of the bomb are still being treated. In these hospitals I found people who, when the bomb fell, suffered absolutely no injuries, but now are dying from the uncanny after effects. For no apparent reason, their health began to fail. They lost appetite, the hair fell out, bluish spots appeared on their bodies, and the bleeding began from the ears, nose, and mouth. At first, the doctors told me they thought these were the symptoms of general debility. They gave their patients vitamin A injections. The results were horrible. The flesh started rotting away from the hole caused by the injection of the needle, and in every case, the victim died. That is one of the after effects of the first atomic bomb man ever dropped. And Burchett continued, just to end with, it's really a very powerful read, the count of dead number 53,000, but another 33,000 are missing, which means certainly dead. And the day I stayed in Hiroshima, and this is nearly a month after the bombing, 100 people have died from its effects. There were some of the 13,000 seriously injured by the explosion, another 40,000 were slightly injured. Then he says these casualties might not have been as high except for a tragic mistake. The authorities thought this was just another routine superfort raid. The plane flew over the target and dropped the parachute, which carried the bomb to its explosion point. That was, I guess, the parachute that Ms. Sasamori had seen. The American plane passed out of sight. The all clear was sound, and the people of Hiroshima came out from their shelters. Almost a minute later, the bomb reached the 2,000-foot altitude at which it was time to explode, at the moment when nearly everyone in Hiroshima was in the streets. Hundreds upon hundreds of the dead were so badly burned in the terrific heat generated by the bomb that it was not even possible to tell whether they were men or women, old or young. Of thousands of others near the center of the explosion, there was no trace. They vanished. The theory in Hiroshima is that the atomic heat was so great that they burned instantly to ashes, except that there were no ashes. So this is, again, very powerful and sad to think about, really the horrors that Burchett was able to describe very candidly and vividly. And one American, I think it's not very well known, that there was one great American who very early on expressed dissent right after his drop, an Oklahoman, Woody Guthrie, who had served in the Merchant Marines during the Pacific War. On September 7, 1945, Private Guthrie wrote a song. Actually, I was lucky to do some research in his archive, the wonderful Woody Guthrie Museum that they've set up in Tulsa, and I found all these songs of his that I don't think are that well known, or it's not known to the degree to which he sang them, but it's a great window into Guthrie's courage and outspokenness as a political activist. And yeah, one was from September 7th, so just a month after the bomb was dropped. It was called What Kind of Bomb? And it read, there was Tibbets, Karan Nelson, and Fearby flew that B-29 named the Enola Gay. They took off from Guam on a clear summer day to hang out a bomb over Hiroshima Bay. Bob Shumar, grab your glasses, watch that one go. Looks like some mean volcano bubbling up down below. We stuck our heads out our windows to see the big show. Hiroshima, you're a good town, I hate to see you go. And Guthrie continued, the jolt was so bad that it shook all the sky. A cloud sprouted up 40,000 feet high. The heat flashed so bright that it outshined the sun. We asked one another, oh, what kind of bomb? And then he wrote another song called Talking Atom Bomb, and he warned, when the flash and drash and the big fire comes, and actually has appreciated what Ellsberg has warned about, because Guthrie and Ellsberg basically making the same points. Guthrie is saying, when the flash and drash and the big fire comes, if your phone don't work and your train tracks broke, if your highway's gone and your tunnel's all stuck in with you and your whole family get knocked about 9 miles, be a little bit complicated finding a hospital. Only way to save your skin from this bomb blast is to outlaw the big bomb, and I mean fast. I don't care if the delivery boy talks to me about private enterprises or public ownership or what. Just shows me you've gotten plumb crazy thinking you can duck these new bomb blazes. And Guthrie provided a powerful critique of the nuclear arms race in terms that foreshadowed Stanley Kubrick's classic of the Cold War, Dr. Strangelove, as well as people like Daniel Ellsberg, whistleblowers from the inside. And Woody's songs were, I think, among the first to protest the bombing, anticipating also movements against the bomb by atomic scientists. One other song he wrote I found was called World's on Fire, which proclaimed, my angel, my darling, when the atom bomb does come, let me be your pillow while this world's on fire. And that was the illusion that I think Abel was speaking of, if the United States builds this arsenal and drops a bomb, somehow America won't itself be affected. He said, when that bomb comes, let me be your pillow while this world's on fire. When the flames go creeping, when the smoke plume is leaping, we'll play like we're sleeping while the world's on fire. Woody's voice, along with Habakkuk, and literally with global warming, our world is on fire out in California. So we are facing serious threats to humanity at this time. I think with the threat of global warming as well as the threat of a new nuclear arms race. And that's why I think we need the voices, why I think a gathering like this is so important. And to, those voices need to be heard more broadly. The Habakkuk, Wilfred Burchett, and Woody Guthrie, as well as Dan Ellsberg. These are the kind of prophets of our own time. And the world environment is very bad now. And with regards to the nuclear issue, I think thing that's very scary is the deterioration in relation between the two major nuclear powers, the United States and Russia. When Mr. Trump went to Helsinki for a summit with his Russian counterpart, which was standard, although most of us here, and I included, think Mr. Trump is a horrible person. It is standard fare for presidents to visit and have summits with their Russian counterpart. I was among those very disturbed that the media and political classes went crazy just that he was meeting with the Russian leader and were accusing him of treason for that. The Russian President Putin has been accused of all kinds of offenses, many of which are difficult to prove, including election meddling. And this climate of growing Russophobia is undermining prospects for better U.S.-Russian relations and the prospects for a new détente. William J. Perry was a Cold Warrior who served as Defense Secretary under Bill Clinton. He warned that the danger of nuclear catastrophe now is even greater than the Cold War. The United States, under the rubric of NATO, currently encircles Russia militarily and is engaged in provocative military exercises and maneuvers that has prompted countermaneuvers by Russia and the growing arms race. The 2010 START Treaty was signed between Dmitry Medvedev and the Obama administration. It limited the number of deployed nuclear warheads to 1,550 for each side. Now this obviously is a very high number, and we should strive for much better than that. It also, although at least it was a start, it's good that at least the two countries were talking and at least set a limit that obviously we'd like to lower to 0 or maybe 1 or 2. The same treaty had trims the number of deployed nuclear-capable submarines, long-range missiles, and heavy bombers to 700, with an additional 100 in reserve. Now, the danger is that this treaty, a very weak treaty, but at least a starting point, expired in 2021. And what disturbs me is that powerful forces in the intelligence community and politics appear intent on undermining meetings in which this treaty could be ratified, which Putin did propose. Now, Trump said the treaty is one of the bad deals the U.S. negotiated, so it's not clear if Trump is committed to renewal. If it is not renewed, though, we will have no limits on the number of nukes that can be developed, and according to former Secretary of State John Kerry, we would, quote, court nuclear competition that brings neither stability nor security. In 2009, Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize for vowing to promote nuclear disarmament during his presidential campaign, and he was applauded in the United States and around the world for doing so. Unfortunately, Obama soon backtracked on this pledge, and driven in part by lobbying by the Bechtel Corporation of San Francisco, which runs many of the nuclear weapons labs, which were privatized under George W. Bush, Obama initiated $1 trillion nuclear modernization program to upgrade the U.S. nuclear arsenal. By 2016, the Obama administration had spent $450 million extending the life of nuclear bomb designs, upgraded major nuclear weapons laboratories, graded hundreds of B-61 nuclear bombs, and provided well over $1 billion for the development of new nuclear long-range bombers and nuclear-armed submarines, as well as nuclear-tipped weapons that gave off the illusion of being less dangerous. Seeking to renew the use of nuclear power in space, Obama also called for the revived production of plutonium-238 for use in space devices, and for more research into nuclear thermal propulsion. Obama's choice to head the NASA, Charles Bolden, favored nuclear-powered rockets, which he told the Council on Foreign Relations could be launched from space. Sadly, Trump's, I think, in my view, Julian Assange put it best, in American politics we're faced with a choice often between syphilis and gonorrhea at the national level. Not here in Fayetteville, as we've seen, we have very good local politicians. But when you get to national presidential races, occasionally a candidate like Obama looks good, but then his record doesn't live up to the promise. And then we get, Mr. Trump, who's a nightmare, and his nuclear policy is worse. It doesn't seem like it can get much worse than a $1 trillion nuclear modernization program and nuclearization of space, but Trump managed to have a worse policy. His nuclear policy calls for an expansion of America's nuclear arsenal and loosens the conditions under which nuclear weapons could be deployed. I think that's very scary. In the new nuclear proposal of Trump, there's a loosening of the conditions in which these weapons could potentially be deployed, to include not only a response to nuclear attacks, but also significant non-nuclear strategic attacks, including but not limited to attacks on the U.S., allied or partner civilian population or infrastructure, and attacks on U.S., this is just reading from the Trump nuclear policy, attacks on U.S. or allied nuclear forces, their command and control or warning and attack assessment capabilities. So nuclear weapons could be deployed even with non-nuclear attacks on the U.S. ally. The Trump policy, in addition, calls for the development of new types of low-yield nuclear weapons, which could be deployed on a submarine-launched ballistic missile, and for a new nuclear sea-launched cruise missile. These latter weapons lower the bar for use by, again, creating the illusion that a use of nuclear weapons should remain limited and not escalate into large-scale nuclear exchange. As former Secretary of State George Shultz recently testified, a nuclear weapon ultimately is a nuclear weapon. You use a small one, then you go to a bigger one. He says, I think nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons and we need to draw the line there, which I think everyone here would agree with. The Arms Control Association concluded that, quote, the Trump administration's nuclear policy takes the country in the wrong direction by increasing reliance on nuclear weapons and expanding the circumstances contemplated for their use, calling for new types of nuclear weapon systems that will provoke or exacerbate an arms race and will raise the risks of miscalculation and use. The U.S. currently has an estimated 6,800 nuclear warheads. hundreds of which can be launched within minutes, and Russia also has about the equivalent number. That's why, again, I think good U.S.-Russian relations are quite vital at this time. About 400 nuclear tipped missiles are stationed underground in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, and North Dakota. Of course, yes, an important side issue is the environmental consequences we should be concerned about of all these weapons. These underground stations are staffed 24/7 and kept on hair trigger alert, ready to launch if and when they receive orders from the president, who appears to be mentally unstable. Since 1945, the U.S. has produced more than 70,000 nuclear warheads, which according to Wikipedia is more than all other nuclear weapon states combined. So this should certainly concern all of us. And if budgets and government spending priorities reflect the moral character of a civilization, unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do before we reach a higher moral standard where we can feed our populace and provide good education should be our priority instead of outdoing the rest of the world in production of nuclear weapons. General Lee Butler, commander of the Strategic Air Command, issued, this is during the Cold War, I think he worked with Ellsberg, he issued a mea culpa upon his retirement in which he rebuked the grotesquely destructive war plans and terror-induced anesthesia which suspended rational thought, made nuclear war thinkable and grossly excessive arsenals possible during the Cold War. Butler added that mankind escaped the Cold War without a nuclear holocaust by some combination of diplomatic skill, blind luck, and divine intervention, probably the latter in greater proportion. Whether the same luck will prevail in the Second Cold War is not worth leaving to chance. And again, that's why I reiterate my point that at this time we need to find a way to have better relations with Russia and not move towards a second Cold War. And at this time, on the 73rd anniversary of Hiroshima Nagasaki in the year 2018, I think it's very important to continue to remember the voices I mentioned at the beginning. Yasuaki, Shigeko, Wilfred Burchett, who set a very high standard of journalism, as well as Willie Guthrie, who is an artist with a social conscience, a creative genius, an artist with a social conscience, who spoke out against these atrocities. Starting with us today, we need to work to transcend this poisonous political environment that now exists and work together for a new era of non-proliferation and peace so the tragedies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are never repeated and future generations may live happy and healthy lives. Thank you.
Jeremy Kuzmarov. That, sometimes I think all of us probably wonder alone, is it necessary to continue to do this after all these years? And I think you just proved that it is. And there's, first of all, we should not be allowed to be kept from hearing those details that are so difficult to hear because it was by our hand. And secondly, there's so much still to be concerned about, still brewing and not getting better. And we need to be vigilant, and we need to keep doing this. And so we're just about to finish up. I just wanted to, before we do our last thing, we're going to sing again. But I do want to thank I want to thank Pauline for being back there filming, and I want to thank Audrey for filming. I certainly want to thank Sister Rosalie for coming, and Walter. Schmidt, and of course Dr. Kuzmarov. So, what a wonderful program. We thought, in the wake of, by the way, Gladys, is there anything else that no, we're okay? Okay, all right. In the wake of the Hiroshima bombing and Nagasaki both, a poem emerged from the Japanese people. A very simple poem, a very short poem that is still emerging all over the world. Very simple words, may peace prevail on earth. And of course you've seen those on the peace poles that have been spread around town some. There used to be one, in fact, in the fountain right here in front of the UCM building. I guess remodeling is, I think slowly disappeared. Some of them have actually rotted away over the years. But it's important. It's a simple poem. Of course, another place you see it is with Hank Kaminsky's Peace Sphere. And by the way, they couldn't be here. Normally they bring the peace crane. You all remember the big fabric peace crane? But he's actually at they went to had some health concerns, and they couldn't be here today. So a tradition is starting to emerge of a song and a poem that Don and I wrote together when we were actually inside of Hank Kaminsky's Peace Sphere. Okay, so you might not realize that there's a hatch on the bottom. And before it was delivered to the town center, he invited us to come bring our instruments and sit inside the Peace Sphere for a while. And a song emerged very quickly. And it's very simple. It's just the may peace prevail on earth. And I'm going to ask Don to come up again and help me. And we need your help. And it's very simple. Musically, it's no big deal, but the lyrics are simple but powerful. And it's a message we need to keep in heart. And thank you all for being part of our larger Peace and Justice family for the OMNI Center. We really appreciate you being here for this. And so we're going to all sing together. And if you can harmonize, that's good. I mean, just